Good afternoon, and thank you for your interest in our program today on Home Rule Charter. My name is Amy Davis, and I am co-chair of programs for the League of Women Voters of Mason County. And normally we hold our meetings every third Tuesday between September and May at the Olympic College Library Meeting Room. But in these unusual times for the health and safety of us all, we're just a few people here, and we're practicing our social distancing rules. Thanks to Mason Web TV. This meeting will be on Mason Web TV, archived there, and on the League of Women Voters of Mason County's website. So today, we hope to inform ourselves and our viewers on Home Rule Charter, which is an alternative form of county government. It's a local government designed by the people, for the people. So 7 counties in Washington State have adopted this form of government, and they've all customized it according to their own specific needs in that particular county. So we hope you find this possibility as intriguing as we have. And now I will introduce Karen Herr, who is a league member and co-chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. Well, as Amy stated, today we are learning about Home Rule Charter. Our program has changed a bit in the last couple days. 2 of our presenters decided that it was in their best interest to stay a little closer to home, and that's understandable because one was driving up from Clark County and the other one down from Clallam County. The good news is Eric Johnson has agreed to not only give us an overview of Home Rule Charter, but also present information on the freeholders' responsibilities and the charter review processes. So thank you, Eric. So I'd like to introduce Eric to our viewers. Eric served as the Executive Director of the Washington State Association of Counties since 2008. Prior to joining WASAC, Eric served as the Lewis County Commissioner, being first elected in 2000 and re-elected in 2004. As the County Commissioner, Eric's primary focus on transportation and public works, land use and natural resources, and improving health and human services in distressed rural communities. Eric started his professional career in parks, recreation, and natural resource management, serving in administrative positions in Lewis County, the cities of Chehalis, and Bellingham. He also served 9 years as the Assistant Director of the Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office. Eric is passionate about effective and efficient delivery of public services, improving public policy and transparent processes, strategic organizational improvement, and ensuring accountability for public expenditures. Eric holds a Bachelor of Arts from Western Washington University and a certificate from the Executive Management from the University of Washington Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. So welcome, Eric Johnson.
Great.
I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here. Yeah, much smaller crowd than we potentially had originally thought, but thank you very much. I look forward to having a kind of a fun, intimate conversation on county government. This really is the geek presentation because not many people talk about county charters until that county actually gets into that. So I have a presentation that will kind of just walk through and give you an understanding of home rule and county charters, but perhaps step back just a little bit as well about why counties sometimes get there, or really what is the framework of county government in Washington State. So some of the materials that I'm going to present today and share with you are kind of an excerpt out of a larger presentation that we do on county government, a larger understanding of why we have the form of county government we have in Washington State, and why our Constitution was amended to allow for charters as well. So Washington State in the history of county government actually predates statehood. Most of the framework of our county government actually goes back into the Oregon Territorial Provisional Government, where they set up 4 districts. They didn't set up counties originally. And the Northern District was what was called the Vancouver District. The first county that was actually established was Lewis County. It was the very first county. Vancouver District became Vancouver County, then Clark County. It was the transition of how that actually occurred. There were 34 counties at statehood. So we had an opportunity to kind of progress from being districts to actually having 34 counties at statehood. And then 4 counties were ultimately added: Ferry, Chelan, Benton, Grant, Pend Oreille, and Chehalis County actually became Grays Harbor County in a name change in 1915. So our last county that was created was in 1911. Pend Oreille County was carved out of a portion of Stevens County. So it takes an act of the legislature to ultimately create a county in Washington State. It's not done by the citizens. The citizens can petition for that, but it ultimately takes an act of the legislature to create counties. County government was created, and it really goes back to very early stages, is that the form of county government that really we are familiar with was really established by kings, centuries ago, where a county or a shire or a division of an area would be in place to be able to administer the direction of the king. And so counties actually have that type of framework where we are agents of the state of Washington. We are created to perform duties on behalf of the state of Washington. Elections that we just finished up is a great example where the county auditor and their election manager, they actually perform a function on behalf of the state of Washington. They conduct elections on behalf of the state of Washington, and therefore for many of the subdivisions of the state of Washington as well. We run the entire trial court system on behalf of the state of Washington. No one enters a state penitentiary without going through the county superior court system. We run that on behalf of the state of Washington. The prosecutor files on behalf of the state of Washington. They don't file on behalf of the county, they file on behalf of the state of Washington. So the prosecutor, again, an agent of the state of Washington. The entire property tax assessment and collection system is done on behalf of the state of Washington. The county treasurer and the county assessor, they assess property on behalf of all taxing jurisdictions on behalf of the state of Washington. They collect property tax on behalf of the state of Washington. Those would be examples where we are the agent of the state of Washington performing a function on behalf of the state. That's one of the core functions and reasons that counties exist. We're a regional provider. We're in the midst of a very significant public health crisis. And the 35 local health jurisdictions, some are county departments, some are independent local health jurisdictions. They are at the kind of the tip of the spear of this right now in a public health crisis and a pandemic epidemic with COVID-19. We provide a regional service. Sometimes it's just countywide. Oftentimes, though, it is a regional-based service as well. We do a variety of things like watershed-based planning, where it crosses geographic boundaries, just not the political boundary of the county. So there's things at times we do as a regional provider. And then we are the direct provider of services in the unincorporated area. So we deliver the road system in the unincorporated area. We deliver law enforcement in the unincorporated area. We do such things as planning and building and code enforcement in the unincorporated area. So we're the direct service provider like a city is in the city. We're the direct provider of services in the unincorporated area. So as you can see, it's just not, that every citizen, regardless of the way they are going to live, are going to get a service from a county government. Some are going to get more services because they live in the unincorporated area as well. So that's a quick synopsis of how counties were formed. The Constitution, Article 11, Section 4, and I've got a copy of those for those folks that are interested, and you can need some bedtime reading sometime, read the state constitution. It required the legislature to establish a uniform system of county government, which shall be, establish a system of county government which shall be uniform throughout the state, except for hereinafter provided. So the legislature had to create what we call a uniform system of county government, fundamentally important. And the legislature has done that through the establishment of RCW 36. RCW 36 stipulates what county government should be, and in fact describes what a uniform system should be in 36-16-030, which is elective county officers enumerated. There should be a county assessor, a county auditor, a county clerk, a county coroner, 3 county commissioners, a county prosecuting attorney, a county sheriff, and a county treasurer. And except in counties less than 40,000 people, a county coroner shall be elected as well. In counties under 40,000, a county coroner is also functions are performed by the elected prosecuting attorney. So it's a very unique system. That is what's called the uniform system of county government. The legislature had to create it. It's described in RCW. We have Initially, all 39 counties had this form of government. And then in 1948, the Washington State Constitution was amended by the citizens to allow for home rule, meaning that the individual citizens of an individual county could define how they wanted to form the organizational structure of their county government. And so that was the initial phase. It wasn't until 1968 when King County was the first county to establish a home rule charter. King County attempted to do so in 1952 and it failed. So it wasn't then until 1968 when they passed their county charter. In 1972, another charter amendment was made, another amendment to the state constitution was made to allow for consolidated city and counties. There has been a couple attempts to do that, none of which have passed. And it's not, I think there's only two that I think I'm aware of. I think Spokane and Thurston both have attempted the combined consolidated form of government. It's not attempted very often, and it's a very difficult, particularly when there's multiple incorporated areas in a county. Mason would be one where you wouldn't have that challenge as much as let's say King County with 39 counties. To do a combined city county is very problematic. So let's talk a little bit about this uniform system a little bit more. Why I read those 7 different elected officials. Not all of them are defined and listed in the state constitution. The state constitution lists the Board of County Commissioners as a required component of the uniform system. The sheriff, the county clerk is the clerk of the Superior Court, keeper of all of the court's records. The county treasurer, the county prosecuting attorney, Superior Court and District Court judges, those are constitutional officers. The auditor, the assessor, and the coroner are all statutory officers. Those were created by statute. We had a number of other independent elected officials at some point as well. We had county shipwreck masters at one point that took control of shipwrecks on the coast. County education superintendents were at one point. School superintendents were one time elected. County engineers and county surveyors were at one point elected. I don't know if anyone knows the most famous county surveyor in history. Nationwide, George Washington was the first county surveyor in Culpeper County. So, it's great to see the very first president of the United States had history in county government as well. So, but it's just an interesting element. And as you're going to learn about charters in particular, is that there are some requirements that certain offices cannot be changed. The county prosecuting attorney's office cannot be changed by the Constitution, nor can Superior Court judges or District Court judges. Put that in context. The other thing that the uniform system requires is that all of the offices that I mentioned are partisan. That's in the statute. When you go to change a charter, and this is probably more popular in recent years, is a lot of offices have become nonpartisan in the charter process. That's again up to you, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But again, in the uniform system, 7 independent elected officials, with the exception of counties under 40,000, and all of those are partisan in nature. You have to declare your party. You can now declare no party preference because of the way in which we now conduct our elections, but you have to list something. They're not nonpartisan by law. Questions so far? Okay. If not, since we're here to talk about charters, I'll kind of dive into that. We have 7 county charters, 7 counties that have gone through the process all the way from start to finish. And there is many more examples probably exist of counties that have started the process, or at least attempts to do a county charter, than in fact have passed. In fact, in the last probably half a dozen years or decade, with the exception of Clark County, I think we've had 5 or 6 counties that have attempted the start of the process, and those citizens didn't even get to the point of electing their freeholders. They just kind of fizzled. We have King, which was initially passed in 1968. They began to elect folks in 1969. Clallam in 79, Whatcom in 79, Snohomish in 1980, Pierce in 1981, San Juan in 2005, and Clark County in 2014. So those are the 7 counties that have gone to the point of what they have been able to accomplish. Let's talk about those 7 charters as well, because I think this is the interesting piece of this discussion. And in one of the handouts that I provided to you, and I think I got it, it's called Home Rule County Charters. There's a handout there if you have a chance to take a look at that. We'll talk a little bit about the 7 county charters and how they differ from each other. And on page 5, we really have the opportunity to kind of dive in to look at the fact that citizens in those 7 counties all have approached this differently. And as we're going to talk also about the fact that those charters get amended from time to time as well, and those changes happen. And I don't have the whole history of how charters changed over time to time, but I can give you a couple of examples. King County, for example, initially appointed their county sheriff. There is a lot of concern about corruption, same thing with Pierce, in the sheriff's department, where this was, keep in mind, these were times when perhaps bribery was a little more prevalent with law enforcement and wanting protection for whether they were dance clubs or gambling establishments, etc. And so there was some exchange of money going on. And King County really wanted to clean up. They wanted better government. They wanted cleaner government. And they wanted to be able to have more accountability of the county executive having the authority to appoint the top law enforcement officer rather than the citizens electing that. And so that lasted for probably a good 2 decades before now they elect their county their county sheriff again. King County is another good example where they eliminated the county auditor function, and after the 2000 election, they decided that they wanted to elect an elections supervisor, elections manager. There were other functions of the county auditor's office, finance, recording and licensing stayed as an independent branch under the administrative function, but the elections supervisor is now an elected position in county government. Clallam County, the best of our knowledge, is the only place where it elects its director of community development. The Growth Management Planning Act was very contentious in many counties, Clallam being no different, and they wanted an independently elected official to help craft that document and help lead the effort to create a planning document and administer their building division independent of the Board of County Commissioners, independent of the legislative branch group. And so they now have an elected county planning director. They call it Director of Community Development. And ironically, the person that holds that was the first one in 16 years to stand successfully for re-election. So pretty volatile position, as you can imagine, when you deal with land use and environmental health regulation and private property rights. But if you look at page 5 in particular, you can see how each county has differently dealt with the county legislative authority. County legislative authority has gone from 2 counties that retained the 3 commission form of government. But they each treated it a little differently. Clallam County now elects their 3 members by district only, instead of countywide, where in the uniform system you're nominated by a district, but you're elected countywide. San Juan County now has a 3-member council. You get to change the names as well. They're not commissions, they're councils in a couple of counties. They're councilors in Clark County. They've decided to say you have a residency requirement based on population and based on islands, but you're elected countywide. So they've kind of retained kind of a hybrid system. Clark County, they have 5 councilors, 4 are elected by district, and the chair is elected countywide. King County, 9 members elected by district, they're nonpartisan. Clark retained the partisan nature as well. Pierce County, 7 members elected by district, they're partisan. They also instilled term limits. Only 2 of our counties have installed term limits. Pierce County has 2 for the county legislative authority, 3 for the independent elected officials. Pierce or Snohomish is 5-member elected by district, 3 term limits, 4-year term limits. We talked about San Juan. Interesting fact about San Juan, they started with 6-member council. When they were first adopted, their very first charter, they became a 6-member charter, 2 from each of the kind of commissioner districts. And they did that in part to try and deal with some quorum issues. But interestingly enough, in part because they wanted to be able to have a lot of subcommittee activities. And they felt they could have 3 members and have subcommittee work and avoid the open public meeting law potentially. They had a ruling that was indicating that that really was creating an inverse open public meeting, because 3 members could block something from happening. Therefore, you had an inverse quorum of a board, and therefore the whole nature of their theory blew apart. And so they actually came back in their first charter review to go back to a 3-member council rather than having 6 members. So King County at one time was 13 members. They're now back to 9. So all of these are subject to change when you go through your charter review process, and we'll talk more about the charter review process here in a bit. Whatcom County is now a 7-member. 5 members are elected by district and 2 are at large. And 4 of our 7 counties have an elected county executive. And I think this is an important thing to think about, because the other 3 counties have an appointed county manager, administrator, to begin to think about bifurcating the role of the executive branch and the legislative branch. Because the Board of County Commissioners under the uniform system are the executive branch for about half of county government. They administer, and they're the top administrators for such departments as the Public Works Department of the Road Department, which is a fairly large portion of county government. They're the direct administrators executive for that department. They are also kind of oversee the planning department or the IT and general services department. So they oversee a subset of county government. The independent elected officials, those 7 independents, the auditor, assessor, clerk, etc., sheriff, they administer the other half of county government. They're the other portion of the executive branch of county government. So all of our charters typically have said we're going to bifurcate the role of executive versus legislative. 4 of them have elected a county executive who is the top executive administrator over a large portion of county government. The council then simply is the legislative authority. 3 of our counties have gone much more to a county, to what I call a city council manager form of government, where they elect a council to be the legislative body, but they appoint by charter an administrator to operate the day-to-day administration of the county on behalf of the council. So you have to start thinking about the role of the legislative branch versus how is the executive branch and administration going to be performed as well. There's one of the other major reasons that we sometimes see folks talking about a charter is in fact because of the right of initiative and referendum. Is under the uniform system of county government, you do not, as a citizen, have a right to petition a decision that was made by a board of county commissioners and via a referendum, nor do you have initiative authority. And so I'll give you a good example of Soton County. This was when stormwater rules were first being promulgated, and you had to create a stormwater utility. And so Soton County is bordered by the Snake River. They had to create a stormwater utility. City of Asotin passed a stormwater utility. City of Clarkston passed a stormwater utility. The citizens in those communities were able to, via initiative, overturn, or via referendum and initiative, overturn those because the regulations for cities allowed for referendum of decisions of the city council. They come down to the county and said, well, we're going to overturn your ordinance dealing with your stormwater utility and your fee associated with your stormwater utility. And the county basically said, oh, no, you're not, because there is no statutory authority to overturn the decision. So they said, well, how do we get that authority? And the authority would be going through the charter process. And so they actually went through the entire process to elect freeholders and to ultimately put on the ballot that should we do a county charter, and citizens actually said, no, we don't want to start the charter process. So there's different reasons why charters get put forward, and we've had them recently in Jefferson, Yakima, Skagit, Lewis, Asotin, and all 5 of those in the last decade have not passed. Clark being the only one that has passed. And we'll talk a little bit more about the history of Clark County and the decisions that sometimes spur citizens to say it's time for a change. And usually there is a catalyst to motivate the community to say it's time for a new form of government. And oftentimes people will say to modernize our form of government as well. Questions so far on charter? I'm going to start to transition a little bit to how you kind of start to proceed down the charter path.
Yes, Harry. You've got experience as a county commissioner and now as the executive director of the State Association of Counties, so you've got a statewide view and perspective here. In your view of the 7 charter counties, which one or ones have worked particularly well in 2 areas, direct service delivery and citizen access to government?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really incumbent upon the freeholders to begin to think about where do they want to vest power. I would say Snohomish County is a good example where the council really is a very strong, the charter provides for a very strong role for the 5 council members, particularly around budget, particularly around policy, particularly around legislative direction. So it vests a lot of power. And so where do you really want to balance the power at in relationship to that? I think that in terms of access delivery to citizens, I mean, it's very interesting how Clallam, is electing someone who's directly responsible then for a major function of county government. Who's directly accessible. And so when you talk about customer service and how do you assure good customer service, having an independent elected official in that planning department and in that building department, you might be more responsive as an independent elected official potentially than if it was an appointed director, perhaps. So it's a really hard question. I coined this is that it is oftentimes more important about who you elect into the structure than to what the structure is. That you can elect great people into an awful structure and they probably will make it work. And likewise, you can elect perhaps folks that are not as qualified or competent into an outstanding structure and it's not going to work. So I think, from the perspective of how do you find really highly competent citizens that have passion for public service to step forward to serve in these elected official positions is really, really important. And that is going to be independent of the structure in many estimations. So I oftentimes say, which is the best one? You prefer, a county charter over our uniform system, and more often than not, it's more about the people we elect into the system than the system itself. That probably doesn't help you, Mr. Butkus, but I guess that would be a take. But I don't know if anyone wants to follow up on another question associated with that, or?
Yes, the second question. You noted that San Juan had gone from a county commission of 3 to a county council of 6. How did they handle quorum and voting rules with 6? That's kind of traditional. You have an odd number of elected officials, and here they had an even number.
Yep, you had to have them, 4-2. 3-3 would fail, so you had to always have that 4-2 majority. We've also seen some amendments, and I don't know if it got into the charter, if it was just an ordinance, to do taxing measures in Pierce County. They created an ordinance that required a 5-2 to do a taxing measure, kind of a super majority requirement. I don't know if that's made it into their charter, but they have been talking about that into their charter, but they did put that into a county ordinance, which has actually been an obstacle for them to pass the mental health tax. They're one of the few counties in Western Washington that have not been able to pass the 1/10 of 1% for behavioral health and homeless services. So yeah, I think that's something to be keeping in mind as well, which is, how big do you want your county legislative authority to become? And I would also say that this is an interesting dynamic. When Clark County first started talking about becoming a charter county. There were a number of proponents early on that thought that they would become more like a Whatcom County, where you would have 5 or 7 council members, but you would have an elected county executive. In fact, there was a couple of folks already thinking about, boy, that'd be a great position to run for. The freeholders didn't think that they wanted an elected county executive. So a lot of citizens go in thinking about what that charter will look like, but you really have to really be thinking also about who do you want to be in the freeholder role as well, because they ultimately are going to determine what's going to go in front of the citizens, not some of the early proponents of the charter movement. It's ultimately going to be up to what those citizens want to have. Go ahead, Karen.
I think you mentioned that 4 of the counties had elected executives and 3 were appointed. Could you give us any examples of which one would work, how they would work differently, and which one maybe would be the best?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the fact that the 3 county, it really depends on really what you, from a little bit of a perspective of what your philosophical perspective is and the role of the executive. Is, do you want them to be a political figure accountable directly to the citizens, similar to the Board of County Commissioners or any of the other independent elected officials? Or do you want much more of the municipal form of government structure, whereas we want to hire a professional that is trained in the day-to-day administration and leadership of municipal government? And do you want to do that? It is a very tricky position to hire a really good county administrator. I will tell you that. They have to work well with the county legislative authority, but they also have this very unique role, depending on how many of the independent elected officials you have, to honor them as truly independent in their role, depending on what happens with the county charter. So you've got to work closely with the county auditor, or the county treasurer, or the county assessor, or the elected county sheriff, who's potentially running your jail and sheriff department, which is the largest expenditure in your county general fund. And you've got to create really strong relationships. That's a really significant dance to do, because as many of you know, sometimes county elected officials are strong personalities, perhaps, or they don't always want to collaborate because they have a strong role to play within their department. And so it's a really hard role. So I think a really question does become your philosophical perspective of direct accountability to the citizens, or a county manager, direct accountability to the appointing body, which would be the county legislative authority, more like a city council manager form of government, which I think Shelton recently has went to. So, and if you find a good county administrator, you're going to compensate them well, and you are going to work very hard to retain them. So, yep. Yep.
You talked about the powers of initiative and referendum for the citizens. Is that automatic in the county charter, or must it be included in the charter?
Has to be included in the charter. Yep. You would have to add that as a section within the charter. All 7 of the charters do have referendum and initiative authority, though. Yep. Interestingly enough, though, there is good case law around that initiative and authority is not universal. It is really limited to areas of local interest. So let me give you a good example of one good case law is the Growth Management Act. There was an attempt in King County via initiative to potentially overturn a county critical area ordinance and therefore say we don't want a county critical area ordinance. Well, you don't get to, by initiative, say you don't get to follow the state law. In fact, in the PowerPoint, we can just flip there to the last page on page 9. We are what's called a Dillon's Rule state, page 8 and 9. And Dillon's Rule is a legal theory that has been heavily applied in the state of Washington. And it says basically this, that county governments only have those powers expressly granted to them by the state legislature. Your county charter can adjust and reframe the structure but it doesn't alleviate you for performing the functions of county government as prescribed by state law and the Constitution. So keep in mind that as you might restructure county government, your authorities, either in initiative and referendum or in your charter, cannot preempt those responsibilities that are stipulated in statute in the Constitution. And there's good case law throughout that Dillon's rule basically means that you have to have enabling legislation to do certain activities. But there are some areas that might be local in nature that you have broader authority to be able to do. Changing potentially when you elect individuals and how you elect individuals would be of local interest. Pierce County elected their local county officials via ranked choice voting for about 4 years. So for those of you interested in ranked choice voting, this is an opportunity to potentially elect your local electors. Most county auditors would say, no, don't even think about it, but it is of interest potentially. Let's say you wanted a stronger ethic ordinance or ethics law where there's actually penalties associated with that. An ethics commission, so if an elected official was violating certain ethical ordinances that were in place or portions of the charter, there was a manner in which to hold them accountable to that. So there's different things that you can do locally and greater authorities that aren't included in state statute because they're of local interest, and your charter can stipulate some of those as well. So, yeah, good. So let me talk a little bit about the process of where do you go with a county charter and home rule authority. They can be initiated in a couple of ways. First, the county legislative authority itself can initiate a charter process. They can describe then how many freeholders there would be. By constitution, there can be between 15 and 25, and those generally are then divided up by the county legislative district. So if you're going to go 15, there'd be 5 from each of the county legislative district. Or the citizens themselves can initiate via petition, and you can circulate a petition and have to have 10% of the preceding general election, number of signatures verified by the county auditor, and then once that is certified, you then begin to open up, similar to any process when filing occurs, to invite citizens to put their name on the ballot to be considered for a freeholder position. So there's 2 portions, and it's a little confusing, I think, for citizens that have to occur. One is going to be the question about whether or not freeholders should be elected to develop a county charter for, in this case, Mason County. The citizens will vote yes or no on that. At the very same time, they're electing freeholders that may never get seated. Because if the citizens decide and say, no, we do not want to go through the charter development process, then those freeholders can say they won, but they will have no responsibility. If the citizens say, yes, we want to have a freeholder group seated, and we want them to propose a charter, those freeholders have to be seated within 30 days after the election to start the process. So it's really an interesting process where you could be doing 2 things. One, voting no, and then electing freeholders, just in case my fellow citizens decided to say, yes, I want to also have a say in who's going to be on those freeholders. Or you can say yes and also elect a set of freeholders. So that's the kind of the process that you go through in electing those 15 freeholders, or 25 freeholders, depending on how many you have. It must convene within 30 days. There is no time limit, and this is really kind of an interesting element. There is no time frame for when those freeholders have to propose a charter for consideration. So during their first meeting, they'll probably set forth a time frame, or within their first several meetings, of when they want to complete their work by. And again, remind you that any charter that is developed cannot affect the Superior Court, District Court, or the prosecuting attorney. So those positions are going to stay intact via the Constitution as well. So I think I want to stop there, see if there's any more questions about how the charter gets to the ballot. We'll talk a little bit about using Clark County as a kind of a case study about what they did and getting to the point from the catalyst potentially of decisions that were made by the county commissioners by citizens to say, let's start understanding how we get a charter movement going, to ultimately successfully passing a charter as well. Questions? All right, go ahead.
Well, I'll note that we are in discussion with the county commission about having them make the resolution to put this item on the ballot. And that would include, within that resolution, the form and format of a board of freeholders, essentially a group of elected people from the county who are tasked with putting a charter together for then the people of the county to consider whether to adopt or not. So I think at this point, we're well on our way to those discussions. Well, no decision has yet been made. We would be interested over time, I think, in tapping into the Association of Counties for ideas or people we might wish to talk with. And beyond that, you indicated that you probably wanted to go a little bit further into how Clark County worked. And that's especially valuable to both those of us who were involved in this and to our citizens, because that's the most recent example we have to refer to in Washington State.
It's certainly the most successful one, because there have been a number more recent that didn't come to complete fruition. I mean, the exciting thing for us at the association, I think, is county government oftentimes kind of lays below the radar. They kind of chug along sometimes. And so for the chance for a group of citizens to come together and really talk more in depth about county government is really generally a pretty exciting element, because they really do need to begin to understand much more context of what the function of county government is, what each elected office does, a little bit about what each department does, because you're about to set up the governance structure and the function for how government operates in your county. So Clark County is the most recent one. It became an interesting case study, I think. In fact, I have a handout that was prepared by the chair of, in part by the chair of the Board of Freeholders for Clark County, who was Nan Henriksen. Nan was a longtime member of the Camas City Council, mayor of City of Camas. She also was, I think, actually a representative on the Western Washington Growth Management Hearings Board at one point. So she's been very engaged in municipal government for a number of years. And they became the 7th county charter in 2015 and transitioned really towards that uniform system to really this council manager form of government. And that is what they chose as their model. They had earlier attempts to have elect freeholders and to put a charter on, but those were unsuccessful. And along came a situation where the existing Board of County Commissioners made a few decisions that in all honesty, I think really reeked of cronyism and really shuttered the core of a community that really felt that that's just not how we wanted our government to operate. The Board of County Commissioners made a couple of hiring decisions that were pretty offensive to a large number of citizens, and that was really the stimulus for the fact that the community wanted to talk about whether or not we should think about a different form and structure of our county government. And ironically, I would tell you, Clark County had been historically one of the more effectively administered county governments for a period of time. They had a really strong county administrator, a gentleman by the name of Bill Barron. They had a strong Board of County Commissioners. There was a good bifurcation of responsibilities. And this gets back to my earlier statement about it. Oftentimes it's more important who you elect than the structure that you elect. It really dramatically changed, personalities dramatically changed elements associated with that. And the citizens really responded to that. They said, we want to have a discussion at least about, is this still the direction that we wanted? So they had a group that became very active in moving forward and wanting to put forward a proposal to have a look at a county charter and elect freeholders. I believe they had, and I can't remember from the article, I think they had about 150 people, 125 that put their names forward to serve in the freeholder process. So it was a significant interest, and it was, the Columbian, the local newspaper, played a big role in this. They were very pro-charter, at least discussion, and ultimately pro-charter movement as well. You saw that in many newspapers where the media actually was very, very instrumental in pro-charter movement. In fact, there's a great section in John Spellman's book. If you've not read John Spellman's book, which is Politics Never Broke His Heart, it's also available online at the Secretary of State's office. The great section on that, John Spellman would tell you the uniform system of county government the county commissioner was the worst job he ever had. He became part of the stimulus to say, we want to have a different form of government. He was a county commissioner at the time. He became the first county executive. He became the first governor that had ever been a county executive and a county commissioner. But he saw that transition. He saw the need to modernize and make a more effective form of government. That was a big commitment that he made. And I think there were citizens in Clark County that were saying the same thing at the same time. There's always some parallels to be drawn associated with how successful charters have been moving forward. So what really began to occur as you saw this process is that how then do these 15 freeholders come together, in this case with Clark County, to begin to think about what do we want our structure to be. And they began to look. They actually did have the commitment of the county and had staffing support, and assistance from the county prosecuting attorney. So as you start to think about, the post potential successful is how do we have the right people to be able to help us navigate through the process of developing a county charter. And that's going to be part of your post thinking as well, kind of, now what, so to speaking, and what's the planning associated with potential for that. So one of the things that they really started to look at is, what is the separate executive and legislative branch? What's that going to look like? I mean, that became part of their early phasing, thinking about what do we want to be able to do? How many of commissioners and council members? They also were very cognizant of the financial impact, because oftentimes citizens are saying, is this going to cost us more money, or is this going to save us more money? I'm not sure you can find a county that's going to be able to say they reduced the cost of government by changing their form of government. Clark County did their best to stay revenue neutral. They moved their 5 council members to part-time. They had 3 full-time commissioners that were compensated probably in excess of $100,000 to move to 5 part-time. So they tried to stay revenue neutral within the framework of the county legislative authority. And so that was a very important piece as well. So they began that whole discussion about, the role of the independent elected officials as well. That becomes part of what can be very contentious during a discussion. Most of our charters have not initially made many changes recently to the independent elected officials. Some have addressed the Clerk Superior Court a little differently. For example, Whatcom, it's an appointed position. So I think King, it's an appointed position. But the more recent ones didn't touch any of the independent elected officials. They knew they had enough of an uphill challenge making a form of county change without bringing other potential opposition into the process as well. I think as you talk to, I remember talking to one of the early framers in San Juan, I think their goal was to at some point perhaps think about how do you make a more efficient, for example, management structure of county government. I know Clallam County has been talking about creating a finance system or financial management department, which might take pieces of the county auditors, the county treasurers, and so how do we have a true financial management department rather than it bifurcated across multiple jurisdictions, more like a municipality. But there's pros and cons to that. There's the check and balance that you get from creating that in multiple different elected officials. County government was not built to be functional. It was built to be accountable to the citizens with an array of independently elected officials, an array of checks and balances for the citizens to make decisions from. It is It is the most unique of truly representative democracy, where we elect our citizens to administer our form of county government. That doesn't always create function, but it does create accountability and a proper check and balance. So you got to be thinking about that as well. How do you want to deal with open public meetings? You know, if you create a 7-member body, you're going to have a lot of subcommittees of 3 that might not be subject to open public meetings, and you want to do that. Whereas in Clark County, having 5, 3 meet, it's a quorum of the board, those subcommittees are going to have to be subject to Open Public Meeting Act. So keep it thinking that. Same thing with Snohomish. All of their subcommittees subject to Open Public Meeting Act. So things to be thinking about associated with that. Again, initiative and referendum authority. That was a very important piece to a lot of citizens, is we want to have direct democracy. Direct democracy cannot be pretty sometimes. We know that in the state of Washington because we have initiative and referendum authority at the state level, and sometimes you get what you get. It can be really good, and sometimes it can be really problematic. So think about referendum authority. And then how's the transition going to occur? What's the transition period? So if you're going to go from 3 to 7 or 3 to 5, what's the transition look like? Are there going to be term limits or not? Do you want term limits? I would tell you in general, Pierce County with 2 term limits has been a little bit of a problem. It's not provided stability within that organization, or not provided as much stability as others have. But at the same time, 3 in Snohomish County has probably been all right. 2, oftentimes we see the individuals, particularly in a political environment, are already thinking about what am I going to run for next, because they don't have any stability where they're at, so they're already thinking about what could be my next political move as well. So just some things to be thinking about associated with that. Obviously, we talked a little bit about salaries, because that oftentimes becomes one of the rallying cries against, is that, well, we don't know what this is going to cost, or this is going to cost more. And they're starting to have this discussion even in the interim phases before they even know what a charter is even going to look like. So when you first propose the charter, and the concept of having a charter process, people are already talking about, well, this is going to cost us more, even when they don't even know what the charter is going to be, because the citizens haven't even put forward a charter. So that's a little bit about the process. I wish Nan was here. She could talk in great detail. They had, I think, 13 meetings over about a year period. It's a very intensive time. There's a lot of decisions to be made. These are all open public meetings as well, subject to the Open Public Meeting Act. So this is a body that really is going to think very strategically about some core philosophies that they want in a new charter, and then try and align the function and the structure associated with that. So that's a kind of a quick synopsis of kind of how you move through the process to be able to move from, once the freeholders are elected, kind of move through a series of decisions to ultimately develop a charter that could be proposed to the citizens. Go ahead.
I had the opportunity to meet with Nan and talk to her about the freeholder process in Clark County. And I was so impressed with the transparency of the charter process. It was always open to the public. They took testimony from the public, and they actually moved their meetings throughout different areas in Clark County to make sure that everybody had their say. So it was really a citizens process. They included them, and I was very impressed with that. They did it right.
Yeah, really think about this as, we talked about George Washington being the first county surveyor. I think about this. This is the constitutional convention for a county. This is the chance for citizens to come together at the heart of a democracy and say, what do we want our governmental structure to look like? And your canvas, with the exception, you still have to have Superior Court judges, District Court judges, and a prosecuting attorney. Your canvas is blank, really. Now you can go real crazy and the citizens may reject that, or you can be pragmatic, but it's a chance for your citizens to come together in like a constitutional convention. You're electing representatives to be able to say, this is what we want to be. And that's pretty exciting for me as a county government and as a kind of a geek like that. It really is very, very exciting because it's the core of that representative democracy. So whether it emerges with a charter at the end, it's just a very exciting time for citizens to come together and have that conversation.
So have you found that citizens do want to participate in these counties? Has there been enthusiasm for this, or are people just leery of the change and don't participate?
Well, I think people will, I would point to you that because of what you've seen out of the 6 proposed efforts in the last decade, more people are leery or are maybe more satisfied with their county government than not. But I think once they venture into the freeholder process, I think there's generally a lot of excitement from a core set of citizens that care deeply about government. Yep. But it's like, it is a little bit like everything. It's in government these days where there generally is a core set of folks that are going to really spend the time and the energy to really dig deep to understand what we really are trying to accomplish philosophically in creating a structure that will meet the needs of our current citizens. Yeah. If not, I'll move on to the next set I was asked to talk a little bit about, and this is one where, again, the charter itself will dictate, and every charter is a little different, and this is the charter review and amendment process. So let's say you elected freeholders. Those freeholders have put a charter on the ballot. The citizens say, yes, we want that ballot. Is that charter now in place forever? And the answer is definitely not. None of our 7 are, because there is an amendment process that is described in the Constitution, but it is also dealt with differently in each county charter. And so each of the 7 county charters are a little different. I just pulled a couple out to give a couple of examples of how they are in fact different. The one thing that is consistent throughout is that the charter review process occurs, and there is a charter review commission in each of these situations, where the charter review commission, it meets depending. Clark's and San Juan's both described their first charter would be after 5 years, whereas other charters had a longer period to start with. And then Clark's has a 10-year review after that first 5-year period. San Juan was also 5 years, and it had probably one of the most startling changes right away out of the gate was to go back to 3 council members. I mean, that was like, 5 years in, not happy with the 6 and went back to a 3. And so that's a pretty major change that soon, to be honest. But each of them stipulate that. There are other differences. Some of the charters allow the county legislative themselves to suggest directly independent of the commission changes to the charter. And they allow that to be done out of sequence with the commission review. You recently saw, I'm trying to remember which, it's changed term limits to go to 3 terms in, to do 3 terms for Pierce County. And the council put that forward on a not a unanimous vote, but put that forward. But they put that independently of the commission and not at the same time the commission was doing their review. So you just have to think about how do you want the commission to be reviewed. You also, some permit the initiative and referendum component for the charter as well, so that the citizens themselves, via initiative authority, can propose charters to the amendment. Do you want amendments to the charter? Do you want that, or do you want to limit it to just the charter commission? So who really has the ability to amend the charter? And so that, and do you have any requirements within the voting associated with amending the charter? So for us to amend our state constitution, we've got to have supermajorities. You have to have multiple step processes. Do you do that for the charter as well? You've got to have 2/3 of the charter review commission potentially to authorize that. And do you have to have a larger majority, supermajority, to amend your charter, or is it all both simple majority? So things to think about associated with that. And then when does it go into effect? I think the most frequent change, to be honest, that we have seen is in the county legislative authority, is changing from Whatcom's a good example where they have gone from district only to more at-large. At one point they went to 4 at-large, I think it was, in 3 districts. Now they're 2 at-large in 5 districts. They've gone from partisan to nonpartisan. So you have all of those things that have moved. King County is now nonpartisan, where they previously had been partisan. So you see all those changes that might morph in a process. Again, it really is, again, you're reforming those freeholders to, they're probably not having to start from scratch, but they are going through a pretty methodical process right now associated with the process associated with reviewing that charter process. Clallam County is in the midst of a charter review process right now. Oftentimes independent electeds are coming in. How do you want to deal with establishing salaries? Do you want a charter to actually establish a salary commission to establish salaries for the independent elected officials in the county executive, if there is one, in the county legislative authority? Or do you want to leave that just to the county legislative authority to set salaries? Or do you empower an independent charter commission to actually set those salaries? So there's all sorts of elements that you kind of go through to say, how do we want to deal with different elements of the manner in which we elect our freeholders to serve on the charter process, and then ultimately, what charge do we give them? So, and the time frame for do that. Do you want that every 5 years, 10 years, 8 years? I think San Juan, I think, is every 8 years. I think is their current one is a review every 8 years. So all of them are just slightly different, some continuity, but slightly different. And again, that's up to the citizens initially to establish and put forth the charter review process and the manner in which it's going to be conducted.
Do you know if there's a possibility, if there's something that comes up in the county that they could amend it, if it was like every 8 years, could they change that to like 5 years, or are they set for like?
So in the charter review process, if they wanted to go back, and they would have to go back to the citizens and say, yes, we want this charter to be reviewed every 5 years. They would have to put that forward as an amendment to the charter. And so oftentimes, in some counties, you might see 13 charter individual amendments listed. And so they're not just, you're not given a group to approve. You're given the opportunity, proposed amendment 1. Charter amendment shall be, review shall be moved from 8 years to 5 years, yes or no. And so you're given the opportunity to do that.
I'd like to go back to the idea about term limit. Seems to be a discussion point that's coming up again at the national level. Could you reiterate for us, please, how Pierce County is doing it between the county council and the other elected officials? How many terms are they each serving under the current charter?
Right. So under the current charter, the county legislative authority and the county executive both have 2 4-year terms. The other independent elected officials, so the auditor, that's a combined assessor treasurer position in Pierce County, the sheriff, gosh, who else am I forgetting that they have elected? The auditor, they're 3 4-year terms. They're 3 4-year terms, so they have a 12-year limit. The prosecuting attorney and the judges, again, the Constitution is the governing document, the state constitution is the governing document. There is no term limits to that, and your county charter cannot affect their terms. And same thing then in Pierce County, or in Snohomish County, all of their electeds have a 3 4-year term limit. The executive, the independent elected officials, and the county legislative authority. Yeah. There questions?
No?
All right.
All right,
Great.
well, thank you so much.
Thank
For
you.
all this information. I think what we'll probably do is follow up with some kind of online forum from Nan Hendrickson and hopefully from Clallam County also. So that way our league members will, and the general audience will be able to know a little bit more about the specifics of those counties.
Yeah, I think Nan in particular, in the Clark County folks that really lived this process for a good year can really give you a great insight into the experience and what they heard in the community and then what was the stimulus for it actually passing, because there there is a strategy both in the development phase, political strategy is, you know, what can the community accept in a charter as well? Because if you go too far, be too radical, is there too much opposition to it? Versus, you know, it's the ability to change and ability to accept changes. What's the community's tolerance to that?
And Nan had mentioned that actually they had completed their review of the charter in 6 months, and they took the next 6 months before the election to actually present it to the public so that they understood it. People don't vote for things that they don't,
Right.
you know, that's an unknown and they don't understand. So they said they did it in record time for that reason, to be able to present it and answer the questions before it got to the ballot.
Yeah, I think they were of the mindset in particular is that we have a window of time when the community was ready to accept the change and then ready to act on it. And so they did try and, you know, do two things very quickly to kind of capitalize on the synergy in the community to say, this is an opportune time. Let's not lose this chance.
Very good. So that was excellent.
Great. Well, thank
Thank you
you.
so
Yeah,
much.
absolutely. Good. Good luck to you all. And if I can give any assistance, you know, understanding how the other counties, there's generally in each county there's generally a really, you know, someone who's really knowledgeable on their charter. Randy Gaylord in San Juan County, who's their prosecuting attorney, is has been very engaged in all of their charter developments. Is very good. Marco Zayas, who's a commissioner in Clallam right now, is very engaged in their charter review process, as well as, you know, citizens as well. And there's just a lot of citizens that have really been there a long time as well. Mike Doherty is a former Clallam County Commissioner, who was still active, but he was on the first Clallam County freeholders decades ago.
So the same people usually decide to participate all the time, or are there new ones that come in after?
There's definitely new ones, but you look back and you see a lot of familiar names either in the community or have
Political wonks.
I mean, yeah, you look at Clark County. I mean, you look at Joe Zarelli, a former legislature. Val Ogden, former legislator. Who else was on there? Mark Bolt, who was a commissioner at the time, I think, I don't know if he was a commissioner at the time or former commissioner. He came back onto the council. Nan Henriksen, you know, very engaged politically in the community. So there's a cross section of just citizens and citizen activists. Temple Lentz, who is now a council member, was on the freeholders. So oftentimes people are thinking about, you know, this could be a launching board to my greater participation as well. So it's not unusual to see someone that was on a board of freeholders become a member of the legislative body as well. So.
And once the charter is established, do you find that citizens grumble about it, or do you think that after a while they learn to accept it, or are they wholeheartedly enthusiastic about it?
Well, it doesn't stop them from grumbling who gets elected into those roles. I think there's an element, I'm not sure this is completely fair, but I'll say it. I don't know if the tape is still rolling or not, but it is a hard transition for sitting county commissioners to make if they lose some of their administrative responsibilities and their direct relationship and direct control over departments. It's a generational transition almost to see a board transition from a administrative policy board to just a policy board. And that's probably the hardest transition for a community to sometimes make, because they're used to calling their county commissioner and expecting that pothole to get filled. They're now calling their county council member or county commissioner, and there is no direct control over that road department anymore. The control is of a county administrator. The county administrator is now that executive. He's now the administrator, or she, and they then get to direct the day-to-day operation of the community or the elected county executive. So the citizens' behavior doesn't necessarily change either. Oh, I want my building permit. Can you expedite my building permit? Well, that county commissioner might have been able to pick up the phone and call their direct report, who was the director of planning, and say, hey, what's going on here? That's no longer their role. Their role is to work through that county administrator, and that county administrator is going to make that call, or may choose to say, nothing I can do. That building permit is in process, and it'll get done when it gets done. So it's a really dramatic change, I think, from what occurred in the past for a Board of County Commissioners to their new role. So that transition period can be a little rocky for some jurisdictions. I think that was part of San Juan's challenge, is that those three of those 6 had been county commissioners, full-time, active and dabbling in the departments, and that was no longer their role. You had now a county administrator, and Pete has lived in that administrative role and knew that the council had a boundary, and that boundary didn't really exist when they were county commissioners. It now exists when they are just the legislative authority. And so my experience in seeing a couple of those transitions and I've seen it in the city as well. I was in Lewis County when Centralia went from commission form of government. It was the last remaining besides Shelton as a 3-member commission form of government to a council manager. 3 commission members transitioned onto the council, and they had a tough time releasing some of their control over the departments, and that's similar in the commission form of government in county government as well. Great.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.